Good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Kallipolis Radio. Tonight, I'll be reading another portion of Schopenhauer's collected aphorisms. This section's titled, On Law and Politics. Thanks for listening. If you start from the preconceived opinion that the concept of justice must be a positive concept, and then undertake to define it, well, you won't get very far. You will be trying to embrace a shadow, pursuing a ghost, looking for a nonens. For the concept of justice is, like that of freedom, a negative concept. Its content is a pure negation. The concept of injustice is the positive one, and means the same thing as injury in the broadest sense, that is to say, latio. Such an injury may affect the person or property or honor. It is accordingly easy to define human rights. Everyone has the right to do anything that does not injure another. To have a right to something means no more than to be able to do it, or take it, or use it without thereby injuring anyone. This exposes the meaninglessness of many questions. For example, whether we have the right to take our own life. For, so far as any claims others can have upon us are concerned, these are conditional upon our being alive, and lapse when this condition lapses. That anyone who no longer wishes to live for himself must go on living merely as a machine for others to use is an extravagant demand. Although men possess unequal powers, they nonetheless possess equal rights. Rights are not based on powers. Because of the moral nature of justice, they are based on the fact that in each man, the same will to live appears at the same stage of its objectivization. Yet this is valid only in respect of original and abstract rights, which man possesses as man. The property, likewise the honor which each man has acquired by means of his powers, are in accordance with the measure and the nature of these powers, and then extend the sphere of his rights. It is here that equality therefore ceases. He who is better endowed or more active in this respect extends through his greater acquisitions, not his rights, but only the number of things to which they extend. I have shown in my chief work, Volume 2, Chapter 47, that the state is essentially no more than an institution for the protection of the whole against attacks from without, and the protection of its individual members from attacks by one another. It follows that the necessity for the state ultimately depends on the acknowledged injustice of the human race. Without this, no one would ever have thought of the state, since no one would have needed to fear any encroachment on his rights, and a mere union against the attacks of wild animals or the elements would bear only a very slight similarity to a state. From this point of view, it is easy to see the ignorance and triviality of those philosophers who, in pompous phrases, represent the state as the supreme goal and greatest achievement of mankind, and thereby achieve an apotheosis of Philistinism. If justice ruled on earth, it would be sufficient to have built one's house. It would require no further protection than this manifest right of possession. But because injustice is the order of the day, whoever built the house must also be in a position to protect it. Otherwise, his right is de facto defective. For the assailant has on his side force majeure, which is actually Spinoza's concept of justice. He recognizes no other right, but says a person's rights are equivalent to his power, and the rights of a person are determined by his power. Ethics 4:37, Note 1. In civil life, to be sure, this concept of justice has been abolished in practice as well as in theory. But in political life, it has been abolished only in theory. In practice, it continues to prevail. The difference between serfdom, as in Russia, and landed property, as in England, and that between the serf and the tenant, occupier, mortgager, etc., in general, lies more in the form than the content. It makes little essential difference to me whether I own the peasant or the land he works. the bird or its food, the fruit or its tree. As Shylock says, "You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live." The free peasant, of course, has the advantage that he can leave and go off into the wide world. But the serf has this perhaps greater advantage, that when there is a bad harvest, or when he is sick or old and incapable, his master has to take care of him. Poverty and slavery are thus only two forms of, and one might almost say two words for, the same thing, the essence of which is that a man's energies are expended for the most part, not on his own behalf, but on that of others, the outcome being partly that he is overloaded with work, and partly that his needs are very inadequately met. The question of the sovereignty of the people amounts at bottom to the question whether anyone could have the natural right to rule a people against its will. I cannot see how that question could be answered affirmatively. It is therefore a fact that the people is sovereign. But this sovereignty never comes of age, and therefore has to remain permanently under the care of a guardian. It can never exercise its rights itself without giving rise to limitless dangers, especially as, like all minors, it is easily fooled by cunning impostors, who are therefore called demagogues. Voltaire says, quote, "The first king was a successful soldier." All princes were no doubt in fact originally victorious commanders, and for a long time ruled as such. Having acquired standing armies, they regarded the people as a means of feeding themselves and their soldiers. That is to say, as a herd which one looks after so that it may provide wool, milk, and meat. This is based on the fact that, by nature and from the first, it is not justice which rules on earth, but force, as will be more fully discussed in the following section. Force has the advantage of the primus occupans, which is why it can never be annulled or really abolished from the world. It must always be appealed to, and the most that one can hope for is that it will stand on the side of justice. Consequently, what the prince says is, "I rule over you by force. To do that, I must exclude every other force, for I will not suffer any other force to stand beside mine, neither that which comes from without, nor that of one against another within. So, learn to be content with force." It is precisely because this claim was made good that in time something quite different evolved out of kingship, and the old conception of it stepped into the background. It was replaced by the conception of a national father, and the king became the firm, unshakable pillar on which alone the entire legal order, and thus the rights of all, repose and continue to exist. But he can perform this role only by virtue of the inborn prerogative, which bestows upon him, and only him, an authority above every other, which cannot be doubted or contested, and which, indeed, everyone obeys as if by instinct. Thus he is rightly called by the grace of God, and is at all times the most useful person in the state, whose services cannot be rewarded too highly by any civil list, no matter how costly. Justice is in itself powerless. What rules by nature is force. To draw this over onto the side of justice, so that by means of force justice rules, that is the problem of statecraft, and it is certainly a hard one. How hard you will realize if you consider what boundless egoism reposes in almost every human breast, and that it is many millions of individuals so constituted who have to be kept within the bounds of peace, order, and legality. This being so, it is a wonder that the world is, on the whole, as peaceful and law-abiding as we see it to be, which situation, however, is brought about only by the machinery of the state. For the only thing that can produce an immediate effect is physical force, since this is the only thing which men, as they generally are, understand and respect. Freedom of the press is to the machinery of the state what the safety valve is to the steam engine. Every discontent is by means of it immediately relieved in words. Indeed, unless this discontent is very considerable, it exhausts itself in this way. If, however, it is very considerable, it is as well to know of it in time so as to redress it. On the other hand, however, freedom of the press must be regarded as a permit to sell poison of the mind and poison of the heart. For what cannot be put into the heads of the ignorant and credulous masses, especially if you hold before them the prospect of gain and advantages? And of what misdeeds is man not capable, once something has been put into his head? I very much fear, therefore, that the dangers of press freedom outweigh its usefulness, especially where there are legal remedies available for all grievances. In any event, however, freedom of the press should be conditional upon the strictest prohibition of any kind of anonymity. A constitution embodying nothing but abstract justice would be a wonderful thing, but it would not be suited to beings such as men, because the great majority of men are in the highest degree egoistic, unjust, inconsiderate, deceitful, sometimes even malicious, and equipped moreover with very mediocre intelligence. There exists the need for a completely unaccountable power, concentrated in one man, and standing above even justice and the law, before which everything bows, and which is regarded as a being of a higher order, a sovereign by the grace of God. Only thus can mankind, in the long run, be curbed and ruled. The monarchical form of government is the form most natural to man. How could it possibly happen that, universally and at all times, many millions, even hundreds of millions of us men, have subjected ourselves to and willingly obeyed one man, occasionally even a woman, or provisionally a child, if there were not in man a monarchical instinct which drives him to it as the condition most appropriate to him? For this does not proceed from reflection. Everywhere one man is king, and his dignity is, as a rule, hereditary. He is, as it were, the personification or monogram of the whole people, which in him acquires individuality. In this sense, he can justly say, "L'état c'est moi." It is for precisely this reason that in Shakespeare's histories, the kings of England and France refer to one another as England and France, and the Duke of Austria in King John is referred to as Austria. It is as though they regarded themselves as incarnations of their nationalities. This is in accord with human nature, and is precisely why the hereditary monarch cannot divorce his own and his family's welfare from that of the country, which is what elected monarchs usually do, as witness the Papal States. Republics are anti-natural, artificial, and derived from reflection. Consequently, there are also very few of them in the entire history of mankind, namely the little Greek republics and the Roman and Carthaginian republics, and these were all made possible by the fact that 5/6, perhaps even 7/8 of their population consisted of slaves. The case is similar in the United States of North America. In the year 1840, of a population of 16 millions, 3 millions were slaves. The duration of the republics of antiquity was, moreover, very brief compared with that of the monarchies. Republics are in general easy to establish but hard to maintain. Precisely the opposite is true of monarchies. If you want utopian plans, I would say, the only solution to the problem is the despotism of the wise and noble members of a genuine aristocracy, a genuine nobility, achieved by mating the most magnanimous men with the cleverest and most gifted women. This proposal constitutes my utopia and my Platonic republic. People have always been very discontented with governments, laws, and public institutions. For the most part, however, this has only been because they have been ready to blame them for the wretchedness which pertains to human existence as such. But This misrepresentation has never been put forward in more deceitful and impudent a fashion than it is by the demagogues of the present day. As enemies of Christianity, they are optimists, and according to them, the world is a, quote, end in itself, and thus, in its natural constitution, an altogether splendid structure, a regular abode of bliss. The colossal evil of the world which cries against this idea they attribute entirely to governments. If these would only do their duty, there would be heaven on earth. That is, we could all, without work or effort, cram ourselves, swill, propagate, and drop dead. For this is a paraphrase of their end in itself, and the goal of the unending progress of mankind, which in pompous phrases they never weary of proclaiming.